and welcome back to Pictorial on Relay FM. I'm Quinn Rose, and I didn't go to art school, but I still love to learn about art.
And I'm Betty. I also didn't go to art school, but I am actually currently going to architecture school, and sometimes we get to learn about architects who also do art. So today I'm going to be talking about something that I had to do for homework.
Oh man, I love that. You've got to let your homework do double duty wherever you can.
Yeah, I mean, I already did this. I released a YouTube video back in December that was basically a video version of my history paper. So then this time I had to, recently for my architecture studio course, I had to research some precedents, so some buildings and designs of like other of architects, and this was one architect I had to do research for, and then I'm discovered that she also makes art and art installations and stuff. So I'm like, perfect. I will talk about this on Pictorial.
That sounds incredible. I'm so excited to learn about this.
So today I want to talk to everyone about the architect / artist Elizabeth Diller, also sometimes known as Liz Diller. So a lot of the work that I'll be talking about is like, it's not just her creation. Obviously, she works for an architecture studio. She's one of the founding partners of the company Diller, Scofidio plus Renfro. It's a very long name, so if I'm talking to the company about the company in the podcast, I'll probably just say DS plus R. And the name of the company is three of the partners, which includes two of the original founders, Elizabeth Diller being one of them. There's also a fourth partner who recently became one of the four partners. But anyway, a lot of the works that I'll be talking about is primarily driven by Diller because she is one of the partners who's the most involved in the art and art installation aspects of the practice. So hence why the podcast is mostly about her work, even though some of the other works involve contributions from other designers and artists and others at her company. But anyway, so in general, before I move forward, I guess I just want to ask, like, have you heard of her? Because she is actually like one of the most famous architects in the world right now. But I do also know that like architecture is also a niche topic in some cases.
Yeah, I cannot say that I have heard of her, but I also think probably the only architect I could name ever is Frank Lloyd Wright off the top of my head. I don't think I can pull the name of another architect, and he's like the guy. So.
Yeah, no. And that's totally fine, because if you asked me to name like a baseball player, I could probably just name one, and and even though I'm from Canada, I can probably only name like two hockey players. So anyway.
Oh no.
I know, right? Yeah. So but anyway, yeah, that's totally okay. And so I'll just give you a little bit of background of her, but I do most of the podcast I kind of want to talk about some of her work because, as we mentioned before, she is a contemporary architect and artist. She's still alive and practicing. Her life and story is definitely like important, but again, like her life is still happening. But yeah, basically, her company, DS plus R, they call themselves a design studio, but they are actually quite interdisciplinary. So they are these days most well known for their architectural works, but they actually do everything from like architectural design, interior design, all the way to like performance and art installations, like electronic media art. And they really have if you go on their website, it's a very broad spectrum of works. And they actually, in fact, started earlier in their careers when Diller and Scofidio first founded the company. They originally just did art installations. They were just doing these very abstract but still architectural based art installations. And then eventually they got more and more like physical architectural work of actual buildings that eventually got constructed. And so these days they work on like these huge projects that are way bigger than what they were originally doing. But I think it's important to understand where they started in order to kind of understand even how things influence the work that they're doing these days. But one of the reasons I actually chose to research about Liz Diller is because I'm personally very interested in interdisciplinary studies within architecture. It's one of those things or one of these industries where you kind of have to have an understanding of other disciplines in order to practice architecture, because it's not just about building a building and understanding construction. You also have to know about the people you're designing for, whether it's a school or a hospital or a museum or just even somebody's house. Like, you got to understand the people in it and what they do in addition to how the building itself is built. So when I look at the works that DS plus R does, it's like the breadth of what they do, I think is very important to have that just variety. And so, like, for instance, they're most well known for actually being the designers of the High Line in New York City, which I'll talk a little bit about later as one of the works. And then they also did the most recent renovation of MoMA. They've done the Broad Art Museum in LA. They do a lot of museums and cultural institutions, including also recently they also finished or actually within the last year or two, I think they finished the Center for Music in London. But then also they do things like this performance piece called the Mile Long Opera, which is this opera that spans a mile long on the High Line that composed of 1,000 singers. And then also Liz Diller curated a fashion exhibition called Heavenly Bodies at MoMA a few years ago as well. And in addition, she was involved in two of the installations at the 2018 Venice Biennale. So anyway, that's just kind of an overview of of her and her practices work.
That is so many things.
I know, right? So, and I think that's the thing is like, so she actually was, when I was doing research for her, she was named as one of these like top 100 people or something of Times Magazine. And I'm like, well, honestly, she seems like she does a lot. So she probably deserves it. So.
Yeah, this is, I mean, and I know as like you talked about, there's this whole group of people that are connected with all of this, but even being part and a major part that of all of these projects, especially as you're saying, like something that is complex as architecture, which requires knowledge of so many different disciplines, I am already impressed.
Yeah, for sure. I think, and as we go through some of her work, hopefully you'll agree with me that I personally really like her work, and I find them very impressive and inspiring. But I should also mention she has had quite a long career. She was born in 1954 in Poland and actually immigrated to New York with her parents when she was 5 years old. And she studied at the Cooper Union School of Architecture in the 1970s. And so she actually originally wasn't an architecture major. She was an art major. So she was just like taking art classes. And one of her electives was an architecture class. Apparently it's called architectonics, which is almost exactly the same name as the class I'm taking where I'm researching about her. But she was like, yeah, there was this class called architectonics. I had no idea what it meant. I was just like, whatever, it's an elective. And then she started to learn about architecture and was like, actually, I want to do this. So ended up switching and eventually getting an architecture degree. So again, so she had, so she's been practicing since she finished school. So in 1979, and their company was founded in 1981. So again, that was more than 40 years ago. Wait. Yes, that was more than 40 years ago. And then I should mention her business partner is also her husband. So they have been collaborating since they met at the school back in the 1970s. But yeah, like I said, in the beginning, they weren't really involved in traditional architecture, even though they were both architecture students who also eventually became architecture teachers. This is actually a side note. What I find is that a lot of people who teach in architecture schools, because they're more academic focused, they tend to make more, or they tend to be more involved in more of the art installation side of architecture, as opposed to the building and construction, like physical buildings part. And so for me personally, the last like 12 years of my life of my practice I've been more so doing the like physical construction part, and this last year of going back to school has been me taking a look at this other part of the practice and seeing how that or basically learning about it. Where I will ultimately end up is still to be determined, but I think one of the reasons they were focused more so in the art installation aspect is because this was just what they learned about and what they did also in their academic life. One of their first projects was this project called Traffic, and it was a 24-hour installation featuring 2,500 traffic cones in Columbus Circle, New York City, and they basically they placed these traffic cones. They weren't obstructing traffic. I'll just be clear about that. So yeah, there were 2,500 traffic cones that were placed 4 feet apart. And from actually, there's some pictures in that link that is like a bird's eye view. It almost kind of looks, or at least what they're trying to simulate is like when snow falls on a city, like it will cover some areas, like usually the grass part, and then not other areas. So they form these like interesting patterns, like when you're looking at a street or a cityscape. But anyway, it was just a 24-hour installation. It was put there, then it was like, taken away. So these were some of the things that they were doing originally. So, or in the beginning of their practice.
The thing that I like the most about this is that the website describes traffic cones as a material indigenous to the site of Columbus Circle.
I love that. Yeah. Which
isn't technically true, but also kind of is. Yeah. Which is really funny. It's just, I think that just that framing says so much about this piece.
Yeah. And actually, this is a part of their practice is they kind of interweave a lot of different things together. It's actually not just about the artwork. Some things that they work on actually also have to do with like words and writing and like incorporating things like wordplay and things like this into their work. They don't. A lot of the work I'm showing you today isn't necessarily that, but this is kind of an example of the description of their artwork is in a way a part of the artwork. So, especially given that there's no permanent artwork that came out of this, it's just photographs of what they installed.
I like that. It's almost like a behind the scenes commentary on what it is.
So yeah, the next piece is from more than a decade later, actually. So again, in this time, they were doing a lot of installation works. A lot of them are commissioned by art institutions, mostly in and around New York. And so this next piece is called Vice Virtue, and it was done in 1997. And again, it was funny when I was researching her in this architecture class, this particular piece, doesn't have that much to do with architecture. I mean, it is still design related. Again, it just shows you like all the different aspects that they explored. Do you want to describe to the listeners what you see in this particular work?
Yeah, so there are a couple different things going on. They're all glasses, like not that you put on your face, like that you drink out of. And so the first one, they're like a standard sort of circular glass, but they have pyramids inside of them, and one is like an upside down pyramid. So like that the actual holding capacity of the glass is a lot smaller because there's this pyramid in the bottom that's taking up most of the space. And then it's paired with one where the actual glass has like a pyramid with the point at the bottom. And so the pyramid itself is filled with the liquid. The first one is a clear liquid, and the second one is like an amber liquid. Then there's one that has what looks to be a needle with a green fluid in it. And that one, the glass falls down, and that fluid from the needle is injected into the glass. And then finally, there's one that appears to be some kind of ashtray glass. So it's a glass full of water, but also in the bottom of it, in the base of the glass, there's a place where you can put a cigarette, and the smoke comes out a hole in the middle. So it's like, even though there's water surrounding it, there's this kind of like column in the middle that smoke is rising out of.
Yeah, and I'm not sure why the website is formatted this way. There is actually also a fourth glass that's a really tiny picture that will only get bigger if you click on it, but it's a similar one where it's a glass that has what looks like a little like vial that's stuck in it, and it looks like the vial could be pulled out, and inside the vial are a bunch of what looks like medicine capsules. And so the title of these 4 works in Vice Virtue is, so the first one you described with the pyramid is called Reservoir, the needle one is called Fountain, the smoke one is called Exhaust, and the pills one is called Dispensary. Again, there isn't that much information given in the text, but I'm assuming that they're referring to like maybe the liquid is like alcohol or something, and then the needle is some sort of drug you inject. Then the cigarette is a cigarette, and the pills I assume are like pills, like medicine pills or like other drugs. And so it does seem like all of each work alludes to some sort of addiction, or some sort of thing that could cause addiction. Anyway, I before I get your reaction on what you think of this work, I do just want to tell a quick funny story, which is one of my other classmates also researched Liz Diller as his among his inspirations for our project. And so for one of the projects, or one of the mini assignments we had to do was design like a small sculpture that's also inspired by the architect you researched. So my classmate, he designed his own cup based on another project that Liz Diller, another project where she designed, or her company designed, a bridge. So he kind of like mashed that project into a cup as his assignment. But what was funny was like he 3D printed his design, but it didn't they didn't have the filament in the color he wanted. So he wanted it to be black, but it was like a gray filament. So he took a Sharpie and he just like colored it. And then so when he was showing it in class, we were like, "Oh, so can you drink out of it?" And he's like, "I wouldn't recommend it because I colored it with Sharpie." And then our teacher was like, "Well, in typical Liz Diller fashion, if you drink out of it, it'll kill you." So.
That is very funny. I honestly kind of like that better than the original works.
Yeah.
Because I mean, this is like the design elements of these glasses are very cool. The way that like they can be inverted, they're moving, they have all the like the craftsmanship and the ingenuity of the sort of like on an architectural level, I think is super interesting. The messaging of it is like, okay. Like I don't know. And again, this is an older piece of art. I just think that so perhaps like it would have hit different at the time, but I feel like at this point like there's so much art that's like drugs are bad, and it's like yeah. Yeah.
So the next work was actually probably the first artwork that I've heard of when I first heard of Liz Diller a number of years ago. And it's called the Blur Building. And this was probably also the artwork that made them like somewhat famous originally, that ended up getting them commissions to do bigger architectural works. But so this one is a building. It's called Blur Building, but it's technically not a building. It was an installation that was made for the Swiss Expo in 2002, and it's basically a giant fog making machine. So it's nice. This structure that's built on top of Lake Neuchâtel in Switzerland, and it pumps water from the lake and it shoots it out as like a fine mist through these high pressure nozzles, and then it creates this like what they're calling like a weather system in this sort of like bubble around the structure. And so like if you again, this is another artwork that has been dismantled because it was built for an installation. But yeah, basically, like when you look at pictures of it, like all you see are these blobs. It's almost like the shape of the actual building itself isn't the interest point. It's what it looks like with the fog going. So again, like similar to the other pieces I've shown you, these are like quite conceptual. But I think the interesting things about this particular work is like it is literally a building where I want to say like walls or envelope of the building is like not solid, and it's just it's just a blur really from the name of the artwork, and it is really big, and I think like in the pictures, like it's hard to see people for scale because they're obscured by the fog, but it is a really big structure. And so Liz Diller actually has a TED Talk where she talks about this building a little bit, but one thing I did find interesting that she mentioned is that her kind of inspiration or reason for making this work is, again, this is like 2002. She's saying like, as a society, we have this insatiable appetite for visual stimulation. Like everything has to be in like HD and high tech. And she wanted to create something that's decidedly low definition, is what the words she used. So she wanted it to be something where you step into it and it's visually it's difficult to make out like what is there in front of you, and it creates a different experience for your senses. Yeah, and she mentioned like she wanted to create some like a thing, but the intent was for the thing to be like formless, featureless, and massless, and all these kind of words that she was using to describe like things that are very like ephemeral and not physical. Anyway, thoughts.
I think this works on multiple levels because there is the level of like artist intent and like messaging behind it. But even without any of that, it's really cool to look at. It's an architectural achievement. It is a work of, this is the kind of thing that you look at and you're like, wow, that was hard to do. And it's really big and it's doing a really unique thing. And isn't that cool? And I love really big art. And I love it when humans are like, I'm just going to make something really big. Incredible. No notes.
Yeah, no, for sure. Yeah. And that's, I would agree. I think, again, I think the words she used in the TED Talk was just, she was like, I just wanted to make a really big building that was absolutely nothing. And I'm like, you know what? That's great. So
wow, perfect.
Yeah.
I've encapsulated the spirit of this perfectly.
Yeah, exactly. There will definitely be people who would be like, WTF? Like, you know. And I'm sure there would even be architects who are like, can you just actually design buildings that people actually can go into that actually function, as opposed to something that seemingly has no function? And you know, there's all kinds of ways you can respond to that. But I personally, I like some of the things that she said in the TED Talk, as well as in other interviews I've read. Is what she says, what she wants to do is she wants to challenge the notions of traditional space and conventions, and like find ways to get us to think and to you know, to have conversations about you know, what space means to us, and again, what these traditional conventions are and what it means. And so it's like what we do here in our podcast. Like, for me personally, I think anything that really gets us thinking, gets us talking about like art and form and culture and all kinds of things is productive. Like, I don't like, even though haha funny, like this is an artwork that is nothing, but like it really isn't, to me, nothing. It has a purpose. You know, although not everyone would agree, I'm sure.
Yeah, obviously buildings that people can actually be in and live in are super important.
Yeah.
Big smoke buildings, also important in a different way, I would say.
So speaking of buildings you can actually go in, so the next one I'm going to be talking about actually is one. So they, like I mentioned, they eventually did get commissions to build actual physical buildings. And this next one is a building that I've been to quite a few times, but strangely haven't been to yet in the year that I've lived in Boston. It's just kind of hard to get to. So it's the Institute. Is the Institute of Contemporary Art that's in the Seaport area of Boston, and I actually went to it quite soon for the first time. First time I went to it was only, I think, a year or two after it first opened. So it first opened in 2006, and I think I went there in 2008. So fun fact, the Institute of Contemporary Art used to be in the same building as the school I'm going to right now. And then I think our school like either bought the building or negotiated to take over a part of it. And so I don't know if we were responsible for kicking out the Institute of Contemporary Art, or they were going to leave anyway, but anyway, they left, and then this is their new building. So I was researching about this building in the old Institute of Contemporary Art building.
Wow, I love that.
Anyway, so this was actually apparently the first museum in Boston to be built in 100 years, which I didn't know.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah, so there's definitely a lot of museums in Boston, but I guess a lot of them were have been around for quite a while. It's this huge 65,000 square foot building that has temporary and permanent galleries, and there's also a theater, a restaurant, bookstore, and shops and facilities and offices in there. The building is like, it's an art museum, but it's also like a public building for like that has public spaces, you know, for people to gather and rent out and do events and community engagement and things like that. So it's like, it's both, you know, a public civic building, but also what they describe as a place to like have a place to have intimate contemplative environments for viewing art. So they have to kind of balance these different programmatic needs. And then it's also along the waterfront, like I mentioned before. So there's when you're in the museum, you can see the harbor from one side of the building. And so the thing that I quite like about this artwork personally is I think in the link I gave you, one of the pictures, I think it's like halfway down the page, is a picture of what looks like a room. There's like a silhouette of a person walking in it. There's a bunch of computers, and it looks like it's sloping down, and you just see a window, and all you see is water. I don't know if you found that image yet.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so this is, I think, like the media room or something where you can view actually like multimedia art and internet based art, I believe, on the computer. So this room is designed that like it slopes down where that window you looks over the Boston Harbor, and they do this type of thing in a number of their artworks as well as buildings. Is what Liz Diller calls using architecture as a frame. So they will use like walls or structures or something to basically make a picture frame of something outside, and quite often is something mundane like water, but they do it in a way that makes it, in my opinion, more than mundane, or makes it quite beautiful. And what I like about it is quite often the building itself isn't the focus, it's what the building frames is the focus. So it's like using architecture as a background framing structure as opposed to being the thing that you're supposed to look at. So anyway, that's one aspect that they incorporated as well into the Institute of Contemporary Art. And before I get your thoughts on what on that specific topic, the other thing is, like I mentioned, you can see the Boston Harbor on the one side of the museum, and it's the North Gallery. So apparently originally they intended to have lenticular glass, which is like glass where you can only see out at certain angles, and if you're not standing at the right angle, it's the view is obscured. So they wanted to create these, again, like framed little slits of views into the Boston Harbor from that gallery. But apparently the mayor at the time was like, no, this is such a great view of the harbor, you're not doing that. So they ultimately never installed the lenticular glass. I mean, I've been in there. It's really great. You can see this great panoramic view. But she was just like, yeah, well, the mayor wouldn't let us, so we didn't do it.
Yeah, no, I've been to the ICA, and it is a beautiful building. And especially, I think, the way that you can view the harbor and the view of the water is one of the best things about this building, especially because it is a space where you have like events and stuff. So you're not just it's beautiful enough during the day, but like I've also been there for an event at the museum at night, and then it is like 10 times as beautiful to be there and to see the water at night and the lights and everything. And so it definitely works really well for that.
Yeah, for sure. I do think like ultimately, yeah, the framing of the harbor and the concept of the lenticular glass is definitely interesting, but I am also glad to be able to get the full view of the harbor from that. I feel like it definitely would have been a missed opportunity if you couldn't. So I guess in this case, I would agree with what the mayor said. The last piece I did want to talk about is probably what is, I think, their most well known or most famous work of, and this is again another architecture piece, but this is not a building you can go into. This is a very long park that you can walk along. Have I asked you, have you been to the High Line?
I have been to the High Line.
So the High Line was a huge project that they partnered with a number of other consultants, including a landscape architect, which is James Corner, field operations, and a garden designer, Pete Udoff. So it's a 1.5 mile long public park that was built on the abandoned part of the elevated railroad from the meatpacking district to the Hudson rail yards in Manhattan, New York. Originally, this part of the L train was supposed to be demolished, and it had been abandoned for decades, and it was like a blight in the city, which, like, at least that's what the residents' opinion of it was. And there was a lot of calls to tear it down because it's so ugly. But there was also a big campaign to keep it, because it is, the L train is also a part of New York's history, and a lot of people didn't think it was ugly, because back in the late 90s, early 2000s, if you walked on it, in a way, some people found it like actually kind of beautiful and like peaceful. I think melancholic was the word that was used. Not that it's always a positive thing, but it kind of, it was this, this industrial piece of this long industrial structure that has basically been reclaimed by nature in a way. Like there was like grass and wildlife and all kinds of plant life that had like overgrown on top of it, and it actually was quite beautiful, but it wasn't safe to go up and you can't really use it. So anyway, eventually it was commissioned to be renovated into an urban park, and it was actually built in 3 phases. The first phase finished in 2009, the second in 2011, the third phase finished in 2014, but actually there was a 4th phase at the end where the rail yards are that was finished in 2019. The concept that DS+R took for their design is what they're calling agritexture, mixing agriculture and architecture and combining that concept. So what they did is, if you look at the overhead pictures of the High Line, is they kind of blended landscape and like hard surfaces in this like kind of interwoven blending type of way. So it wasn't like, here's a patch where there's green and trees and here's like a walking path, and it wasn't delineated that way. It kind of like weaves in and out in a way where as you're walking on it, you're kind of like going in and out of nature, or you're experiencing things in quite an organic way. So there's these like long planks that will almost like disappear into like a patch of like grass where there were, but then randomly there would be parts of the old rails that are poking out. And then again, like it all seems like this natural blend, even though it's all carefully curated and planned, including all of the plant life that are on it. Basically, took this like abandoned, unclaimed public space and reclaimed it and used like these adaptive reuse solutions to reuse a lot of the original existing structure, and created this park that can be enjoyed by New Yorkers as well as people who visit New York. Originally, when they designed the High Line, they had estimated that maybe like 30,000 people annually would visit the park. So the budget to do this project was $115 million. Since it's been completed, it has apparently stimulated over $5 billion US, and about 8 million people a year visit the High Line. It's basically exploded into this like giant success that has actually even inspired a lot of other cities around the world to turn like abandoned parts of their city into urban public parks.
The High Line deserves the credit, I think. I have walked the High Line. It is beautiful. The integration of nature into it is really well done, and it feels like nature really is a part of it. Like, as you just mentioned, a lot of other cities have started to do stuff like this. Chicago's version of this is the 606 Trail, which is really great. It was an abandoned rail line, and now it's about 3 miles of like this like elevated recreational trail, very similar to the High Line. But it just like doesn't have the same level of nature integration that the High Line does. So awesome resource, still a great little walk to go on or to use for running and all this stuff. But I remember like walking the High Line near around the time that I walked the 606 for the first time, and I was like, okay, so this is the blueprint.
Yeah.
And the 606 is like a less nature integrated version of that. And yeah, so it does make me jealous.
Yeah, definitely. And yeah, I think it's really great execution. And again, like they've once again integrated this using architecture as a backdrop to frame into a bunch of different parts of the High Line. Like there is one part where you can, like, the rail dips down a little bit and you can see onto this city streets, and they basically just framed out this like window, like this large window, and you can just sit there and watch traffic all day or however much time you're sitting there. And I think when I was there a few years ago, I just had lunch there and like watching traffic, and it was like quite relaxing. And again, there's lots of other activities that go on the High Line. There's, art installations, and Diller herself has curated a mile-long opera on it. But one thing that is, like, I found quite interesting and ironic was when I was researching this, there was an interview with her, and people all obviously asked her about, the lasting impacts of the High Line, which there are like lots of different impacts. But unfortunately, one of the impacts is that it has created this accelerated gentrification problem in this area. Just because of how successful it is, it has driven like property values up so much that, most people, or a lot of people, have been forced out, including their own company, apparently. Because in the interview, Diller said their company is actually very close to the Hudson Yards, and it's near the High Line. I think it's within like a few minutes of walking distance to it. And she was saying, yeah, soon we won't be able to afford rent and we'll have to leave too. So basically, this architect created something so successful that their still very successful architecture company probably can't pay rent there for much longer.
Eesh, that is unfortunate.
Yeah. Yeah.
We need better regulations.
Yeah, seriously. She does say, she's like, like, you couldn't have predicted how successful this was going to be. Like, obviously she's still very happy and proud of how successful it was. But, we can't control everything.
Well, I'm sure she's going to be fine.
Yeah, she'll probably be fine. But yeah, didn't really mean to end it on such a kind of bit of a downer note. But I still just mostly want to, talk about Liz Diller's artworks. And yeah, through researching her works, I had known about her before, but through researching her works in this class, really it just made me so like interested, and I basically just want to talk about how cool some of these artworks and buildings are.
Yeah, I really appreciate of everything that you showed me today, the amount of range that I'm seeing. And again, like, obviously that still goes back to what you brought up at the beginning, which is there is a team behind these things. And so obviously when you have different people involved in different things, you're going to have lots of different mediums and influences and all this stuff. But still, like, coming back to Diller's work as a primary driver of these projects, even like from the smallest glasses to these giant buildings, and finally like a real building that someone can go inside of with the ICA. I knew she could do it.
Yeah.
But seriously, and all of them, wow, they're so different, but they all are so intentionally designed. Like, I would never guess that these were all done by the same group of people, but I also can see the same level of care that is put into all of them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure.
Great. Well, thanks everybody for coming along for this episode today. If you want to see our show notes, you can do that at relay.fm/pictorial. And you can follow us on Twitter or Instagram at Pictorial Pod. You can also follow me on Instagram at QuinstaRose.
And I'm also on Twitter and Instagram as ArticulationsV, and I'm also on YouTube as Articulations. And speaking of YouTube, we also have a YouTube channel for Pictorial Podcast, and where we upload our older episodes as video versions onto the channel. So for this one, you'll be seeing lots of cool glasses and blobs and walls falling down and buildings and stuff.
Thanks for listening, art enthusiasts.